Hi there, it's Bronwyn Fletcher. Welcome back to Before Dieting. In the last 2 episodes, if you've been listening along, we've been talking about restricted childhood food access and agency and how these can create lifelong eating and weight patterns. Today I want to bring those ideas to life by telling you about Allison. Her story isn't one about childhood neglect. From the outside, she said her family looked pretty ordinary. But seemingly ordinary conditions in childhood can create eating systems that run in background long after they've outlived their usefulness. My hope is that as you listen, you'll start to see threads of your own eating story with a little more understanding and, of course, a lot less blame and shame. So let's start where most eating systems start, at the family table. For Allison, she grew up in a home where food was tightly controlled. She wasn't allowed in the kitchen alone, and she was never asked what she would like to eat. As you would, over time, Allison interpreted this, that her needs didn't matter. Her mother was a very nervous cook, and all efforts were geared to appeasing Allison's father and avoiding conflict at the table. So the meals were often bland, poorly cooked, and rarely enjoyable. And when meals were put on the table, they came with a set of unspoken instructions, and those were eat what you're given, don't ask for anything different, and don't complain. Over time, she learned that meal times were about compliance. It was about fitting in to keep the peace. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. Allison wasn't a larger child, she wasn't dieting from an early age, and there would have been no alarm bells going off around food or weight. But internally, there was a set of lifelong rules forming, and she was able to distill those down into 3 in particular. She felt that food was something that was being withheld from her, that her choice was always being determined by other people, and that she had to take care of her own needs. Unsurprisingly, Allison started stealing food. It was mostly small things that would go unnoticed, so she'd take biscuits from here and there, maybe a row off the block of chocolate, and sneaking things from the fridge when her mother wasn't looking. She didn't label this as a problem, it was just something that she did. By taking things to eat was how she could meet her needs without asking. It was how she could get something enjoyable for herself in an environment where asking for what she wanted was pointless. It was easier for her to steal it and avoid the conflict. Now fast forward to when Allison is 19 and leaves home and goes to university. For the first time, she has money that's actually hers, which means she could walk into any cafe or shop and buy what she wants without having to justify it to anyone. It's easy to underestimate that moment. On paper, it's just a teenager with a bit of spending money. But for Allison, it was significant because it wasn't just about having money, it was about having autonomy and a choice over what she could eat. Allison began spending up on food and drinks. A latte and a donut became her daily ritual. And of course, soon her weight started to increase. She explained the weight gain to herself with 3 simple statements. She went to university, she started eating differently, and she gained weight. And she was right because these are the facts. She did go to university, she did start eating differently, and she did gain weight. But what she couldn't see yet was that the weight gain was not the beginning of the story. It was the first visible outcome of a much older story. Her eating system had been formed in a world where she had no food access or agency. So when real access finally appeared, there was nothing in place to regulate it because she was never taught how. With the weight gain, Allison did what most women are told to do. She started a diet. And this would become the first of many diets. In the beginning, she could lose weight by following the rules. She'd been trained to do that. But alongside the dieting, confusion crept in. She knew what healthy eating looked like in a general way, yet her eating behaviours never seemed to match her weight loss intentions. And the only constant throughout this was the voice of shame, with its relentless, unhelpful questions of why did I do this to myself? Why can't I stick with the diet? And what's wrong with me? For a long time, Allison's automatic response to shame was to give up. Then after feeling bad about herself for a while, she would perk up and get started on a new diet to fix the problem. But when Allison entered the Waiting for Happiness project, her focus moved away from criticising her eating towards understanding it. She traced her story back far enough to include the lack of choice, the tension at the table, and the stealing of the food. And of course, the realization of what happened with that sudden food freedom when she was 19. Slowly, a different picture emerged for her. She realized that her eating wasn't random or self-sabotaging, it was actually organized. It followed a logic that made sense once you understood the conditions it grew out of. At the same time, she started to look more closely at shame. And one of the things she noticed was how shame kept her from digging deeper into her story. I sometimes call this being stuck in the blame-shame corner. It's like the adult version of the naughty step, except now it's not a short time out, it's the place you end up living from. The purpose of shame in many ways is to block further inquiry and keep everything the same. It says, stop looking, you already know what's wrong, and what's wrong is you. And that keeps you from finding answers that require looking further and deeper. A turning point for Allison was realizing that she could look shame straight in the face and speak to it directly. Practically, she did that by naming shame when it arrived, tracking where it was and where it went in her body, and identifying the shame voice and speaking back to it. So little by little, she stopped allowing the shame to paralyze her. She could still feel it and hear it, but she would no longer obey it. So let's fast forward to today and where Allison is now. She says today her relationship with food feels different. She describes it as having more freedom and ease. She gave an example of taking her daughters to the local food fair and eating whatever she felt like without any recriminations the next day. In the past, the shame voice would have been there with its punishing thoughts and mental audit of every bite. She's decided she's no longer dieting, and she's pretty clear about the harm that the scales and the daily weighing have done and chooses not to engage with them. Instead, she's using other progress measures, things like how strong she feels or how much energy she has and how comfortable she feels in her own skin. She's also let go of old clothes that held her hostage to a fantasy version of herself. Her motivation around weight has shifted too. She'd like to fit comfortably into one clothing size down, but that is only desirable if it's grounded in practicality and comfort. Most importantly, the blame and shame that once dominated her thoughts, it rarely appears now that she understands her backstory. Because once she saw that, going with blame and shame simply stopped making sense. The key message I want to leave you with from Allison's story is that there can be a very long time between the creation of an eating system and when the weight shows up on the body. When you don't know the connections, it seems like dieting is the only tool available. You just keep trying to fix the visible end of the story while the deeper structure remains untouched. If Allison's story resonates with you, I want to invite you to a different starting point, and that is to join the Waiting for Happiness project and uncover the logic of your own eating system. Before I go, I want to say a quick thank you to listeners who've been sending in questions. Several of them have similar themes, and I will be answering them in the next few episodes. And if you have questions from today's episode or from any others, please send them through to hello@waitingforhappiness.com.au and we'll add them to the list for answering. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk with you next week.